Welcome to the Business of Sports on Philadelphia's WWDB 860 AM. The Business of Sports is this area's only interview show featuring successful businessmen and women who utilize sports for large profits. The Business of Sports is brought to you by the Sports Marketing Division of American Advertising Services at 484-562-0060. That's American Advertising Services, 484-562-0060. My guest today is Todd Stofka. He's the owner of Philly Hypnosis Performance. He has a master's in neuro-linguistic psychology, and he's a performance hypnotist. Todd, can you explain your company? I mean, it seems here you do sports performance and psychology, weight loss, stop smoking programs, and business training. Can you explain how hypnosis is involved in all of that?
Ed, hey, thanks for having me on the show. I greatly appreciate you having me on here. And those are great questions. So let's talk about those different areas in sports or weight loss. We're talking about creating a behavior and a mental focus. So there's going to be things that go on when you're going to hit great baseballs or you're going to strike out. You're going to get the ball off the tee right down the fairway, or you're thinking about putting it out of bounds or in the water. So the mental part of that is you go back to Bobby Jones's statement that the game, is played on the 5 inches between your ears. So everything's going to first start with a thought. And what are those thoughts in your mind? And will those thoughts give you the results you want, or do they tend to lead to something that's, destructive in your game or your business?
Okay. All right. Why, when you were younger, did you say to yourself, I'm going to be a hypnotherapist?
That is not something that I said.
So how did you get into sports psychology and specifically hypnosis?
Good question. I think your listeners might be interested in this. I was a sales manager, and I got a chance to take some sales training back in the late 90s. And the idea was I got to pick the class. I found a class on NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And what it did for me was introduce me from being an engineer and a Christian, that had more of a black and white thinking, is how a person processes information. How does the information absorbed in? And how could I have a great relationship, something like you, and yet someone else would be, I might as well be French, and they might as well be, Chinese or something. And we just really couldn't communicate. And as I began to understand how the brain receives information, how it processes and stores it, it kind of opened up the whole world on the area of communications and effectiveness in people. From there, I was able to start a part-time practice in the early 2000s and working with simple things like helping people stop smoking. And since that time, I've worked with over 800 smokers and run about an 85% success rate. In addition to that is helping people with weight loss, because so many people start diets but they never continue. Mm-hmm. So there's a benefit for them eating the chocolate or the pizza and the carbs versus them helping their brain think skinny and be skinny. And the same thing goes on in sports, is that you're going to have those moments when you're in the zone and you're playing really well. The question is how do we get it repeatable? Otherwise, you get slumps. So, you watched, the Phillies this year and how they were playing, and they would have moments of greatness, but then it seemed like the whole team just went kerplunk. And it's just one followed the other, as opposed to someone stepping up and playing and really hitting the ball the way they want to.
Yeah, I saw that actually on your website, www.phillyhypnosis.com. That's phillyhypnosis.com. I saw on your website a link to a video of your interview, it was called Fixing the Phillies, about their early season struggles. The Phillies made a push towards the end for the playoffs. What do you think changed there?
The idea they had me on there was, I said the Phillies had the mental flu.
Uh-huh.
And, they're great athletes. And the question is that, are they bringing their whole game to when they show up at the plate on the offense? And you kind of watch their body language. You watch how they stepped into the batter's box, how they looked at the pitchers, and they just didn't have the confidence of Phillies in the years before. And if you don't have the confidence, if you don't have that mental strategy to get in there and however you created your batting technique and let it come out like, it's a snap of my finger, then you're going to be at a disadvantage, because the pitcher's obviously looking to get the ball past you. And if you believe that you're more apt to strike out than have to get a hit, then that's what tends to happen. And the same thing goes with a pitcher. When I work with, pitchers, it's your ability then to look at that batter and just see the ball go right past them. Okay. And you dominate that energy between there. And so there's that battle that goes on, and who's going to win? And unfortunately, what happens is, your teammates, and you start to believe the wrong thing. And that's why I called it the flu. Like when you
Yeah.
were a kid in school, one person gets it and they spread it to somebody
Mhm.
else. And that's why you watch a baseball game, and that's why you could see a game that has very low score, 0-0 into late innings, and then one person gets a hit. And it's all of a sudden they believe, like, oh, I can hit again. And yet, when you really kind of build that into the strategies that are there, then all of a sudden things begin to change. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a college player that had come off an injury, and he kept thinking about the injury, kept thinking about, well, what if I get hurt again? I won't be able to play, and I'll lose my scholarship.
Mhm.
So we began to delete the whole injury away and have him focus in on being healthy, being vibrant, having more strength and power and speed than before. And then we built in his batting strategy on top of it, so that everything from loading the back foot, the right foot, he was right-handed,
Okay.
quick wrist, we even getting down into the point of watching where the ball's released out of the pitcher's hand, noticing and slowing it down, just like I think it was Joe DiMaggio talked about early on, and seeing the labels, the laces on the ball as it comes in,
Mhm.
making the ball huge instead of something small. A lot of baseball players start to see the ball the size of a marble versus the size of a softball or a volleyball.
Mhm.
And it just changes the dynamic. Well, what happened for him was that we were able to turn his average around, which was somewhere in the low, I think 180s, all the way, so that from that point on he was batting well over 500 for the rest of the season. And when he had that focus, the confidence came back. When he stepped in that box, he owned it. He owned that part in his brain. And so that he took the energy away from the pitchers. The pitchers then were afraid of him because they were going to get hit.
All right. Sounds good. Wow. Over 500 average the rest of the season. That's pretty good. All right. So that was a college player. Now you also work with high school age teenagers and teams. Do you bring the teams in, or do you go visit them at practice, that kind of thing? Or is it just a basic meeting with the team, the coaches, and everything like that to go over some of the youth sports aspects of, I guess, the mental game for the youth players?
Oh, that's a great question. In working with people, a lot of my work is one-on-one, and I do that in my offices in Philadelphia. So your listeners know I have 3 offices around the Philadelphia area, out in Wayne, King of Prussia, the Northeast, and then in Chalfont, Pennsylvania. I also will do work via long distance in Skype. So I worked with an Olympic athlete who, Kadivas Robinson, who made the U.S. Olympic team in the 800 meters at age 35 this year. And so we did it all by Skype. He's the track coach in UNLV, and we didn't bother to get together face to face.
Okay.
Other times I have space in my offices to bring athletes in, teams in, or I'll commonly go on site with them and work with a group and have the whole group participate in that whole process. And really it's about taking them and really focusing on what they want to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever sport we're working on, let's just say hockey, what's the goal here? There's an offensive side, there's a defensive side. So I'm going to work with their coaches, and they're going to give me their strategies, on how they want to bring the puck up. What's the type of dynamics? When they're on defense, how do they steal? When they look at shooting, where do they see the opening in that area in the net? And so we can begin to take that whole idea, and I want to try and put them into that zone where they can easily access it, similar to what Wayne Gretzky talked about when he played for the Oilers. Back in his heyday, he knew where the puck was going to be, and that's where he skated towards, which meant the other, players on the ice did also.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, hockey, it's one of those sports that the mental game is emphasized a lot. The hockey sense is actually something that scouts look at mostly, even more so than talent. I was wondering, I think last summer, not this past summer, but the summer before, there were 3 cases where 3 hockey players committed suicide or died because of drug overdoses and painkillers. Now, that obviously the aspect of depression and I guess the whole being an enforcer, being a fighter in hockey came in there. Do you do any sort of work with depression, or did you hear about that story, and did you maybe want to comment on that?
I did hear about this story, and it's really a sad story that people would end their life over that. And you got a situation, and let's talk about your mind for a second. So if we take from today going backwards, it's in your memory. So you're thinking about what you played up to this point. And so often athletes in their mind think of themselves as only as being valuable as their current position. And if they're no longer a starter, then they think of themselves as something as a less than a citizen. And they built their whole persona around that. Now, going forward, that's your memory. So going forward, now we got your imagination, and what are we doing in our imagination and having that come out? So I always say there's a good side of your imagination and a bad side. And a lot of times where depression comes, it's a feeling, and the feeling was first started by a thought. And the thoughts on the bad side of the three demons I always talk about are worry, anxiety, and fear. Okay. So if you take a player like that, and they're experiencing pain because they got injured, all right? That means they need to help their body heal. B, if they're injured, they're probably not going to play, or if they're going to play hurt, and they're going to wonder how long is their body going to last. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't last, then again, they've lost their contract. What am I? Am I considered a washed-up player? Mm-hmm. And that part in their mind. So that whole part I've worked with a lot around, because if you can begin to take some of that junk out, see, those are all misbeliefs, as opposed to working with players, and you want to see them actually perform the way they want. Mm-hmm. And if they're going to be an enforcer, then they're out there, and if they're going to get they're the one that's going to get in the fight. Just watching their fist, imagine it going right through their head. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And one punch, and they're just down on the ice. Versus, I might cut my knuckles or something. And it's the same way when I work with an MMA fighter. They might be quick and fast, but also, it's when they're hitting the heavy bag. I said, I want your hand to go right through them. It's going to be powerful. I want you to move them with that shot, each hand that way. And you're going to see a whole different dynamic versus I'm punching steel. Now, when he gets punched, I want them to feel like they're steel, okay? And that's the kind of energy that's there. But you got to think about it from the standpoint of what you want. So taking that depression away, is something to really help people format what they want versus what they don't want, which is typically where that tends to run. And I'm not going to discount any type of meds that they may have been on, mm-hmm. To help them around that, because I don't prescribe those. But I do find that a number of people who have been in those modes have been able to delete that, help them turn it way down, and really get themselves back in the game again.
All right. So we talked earlier about the aspect of practicing versus the game day performance, even for an MMA fighter punching a bag in practice as opposed to punching someone in a fight. You were talking a little bit about a client of yours who seemed to do really well in practice, but on game day it just wasn't happening for them. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
This is a very common area, and I think your listeners would be interested. In addition to that, I want to parlay that with a book series I've written called The Test Taker's Guide to Handling Test Anxiety, which I have up on Amazon. I'm going to have hard copies available in classes. But think about it the same way. It's no different for an athlete who on the practice field plays really well, and then on game day comes in and all of a sudden chokes. Okay. No different than a student maybe study, do all the practice tests, then on game day it comes out and then they look at the test and they just blank out in their mind. When that whole process goes on, and it's as if you were playing and storing the information in the right side of your brain. So if you're out there, golfing, and on the practice range, you're hitting great shots, and you store that in your front right lobe, and that's not exactly where it gets stored. All of a sudden, on game day in the tournament, you show up, and now you're actually looking for your golf strategy in the left side of your brain, the left lobe, and it's not there. Mm. And hence, now all of a sudden, it seems like it's blank. Where did it go? What happened? And it's about really developing a context and taking that zone back. So you think about the old statement, garbage in, garbage out, is where you put that input in, you now learn to take that input out in that peak play. And the more you can hardwire that in, the more you build it into a switch that they begin to turn on and understand, hey, this is how I practice, and then this is how I come out and play. That's where you get that repeatability and more consistency in your play.
All right. So that book you mentioned, it came out, it was released last month. The book, again, is called Classroom Learning Secrets for Turning Test Anxiety into Better Grades. For more information on that book, You can visit the Philly Hypnosis website at www.phillyhypnosis.com. Is there a number to call for one of your offices too?
The main number for all the offices to set up an appointment is 877-557-7409. The number again, 877-557-7409.
All right, we're going to go into a quick break. We'll be back right after these messages with Todd Stofka of Philly Hypnosis. Welcome back to the Business of Sports on 860 AM. Again, I'm your host, Ed Palumbo, and I'm here with the owner of Philly Hypnosis, Todd Stofka. Todd, other than a hypnotist, how would you describe yourself?
Great question, Ed. And I think your listeners, when they hear about hypnosis, kind of get this idea from old movies where they're going to see spirals and, pocket watches. And I do use a pocket watch, by the way, sometimes with people, which is kind of fun. But I would think of it more as a mental performance expert. And everything starts in your mind with a thought, how you're going to perform. And if we can learn to change those thoughts easily, think of hypnosis more as a tool. Because everyone goes through it every day. It's a state between being awake and being asleep. Mm-hmm. So you're going to go through that naturally. And in that state of mind, you're very relaxed and your mind focuses like a laser on different topics. And that's really what you want to have happen. You don't want to be distracted. You don't want to be anxious, nervous, frustrated in those areas. And if you can get your mind clear and focused easily, almost like flipping on a switch, that's what most people would like to have. And when they're that way, and they're be able to control those things, then they're more confident. Mm-hmm. And as they're more confident, then they can perform better, whether it's in business, they can stop smoking and decide that it's not going to be a cigarette, it's going to control them, or some food, in the area of weight loss. So some of the other areas that I help people out in is really managing their performance. So it's not only in business and being more confident, getting rid of the fear of making a sales call or a phone call or making a presentation. And the same idea, that they're developing the self-confidence, the self-control, the initiative inside of themselves to see the desired result that they want.
Now, you're also a guest commentator. You've done work at your own office. You said you're moving into a space that can hold about 80 people for those kind of business meetings, those kind of, I guess, maybe not a conference, but a meeting of that sort to talk to an entire sales group even.
Right. In my new office in Chalfont, I have two offices space. One that's obviously for an individual or small, like one or two consultation. We've got a room that can handle about 12 or 15, and then I have another conference room that will handle about 80 or 90 people. So being able to be hired and brought in to facilitate this type of group makes it real easy to do now.
All right. And you also were talking about an event you did this past Monday. You were at an event involving golf, and it was with the American Cancer Society. Could you explain what you did there?
Yes, the American Cancer Society asked me to come and be the golf performance specialist or expert. And I had a number of players who I'd work with, one-on-one to improve their games that were on their committee. So they invited me in to work with the women. There was about 120 women there at Philmont Country Club to help them pre-tune their mind before they went out and played. So one of the simple little exercises we did is I helped them get relaxed and quiet, instead of being nervous, because a lot of people when they show up at a new country club or a new venue that they're going to be a little jacked up and a little nervous. So I took care of that, had them get relaxed, and then I actually had them imagine that they actually were playing golf in their favorite, pro golfer.
Okay.
So whether, it was Annika Sorensen for some of the women playing in women, or some of them were in, Tiger Woods or Bubba Watson. And in their mind, all of a sudden, they began to see that play through their eyes. They began to imagine how would Tiger, or Bubba, or Annika hit the ball here and handle this and be relaxed. The commentary that came back afterwards was this was one of the times that the lowest scores they've ever seen these women shoot on a very hard country club. And this was only something that I did in about 20 minutes. So imagine when I work with someone for, a number of sessions. And, we can really work on that whole performance. That's really the effectiveness in really improving people's lives because, it takes away the embarrassment they're, wanting to give up. A lot of cases, people will lose promotions because they won't go for something that they want. And then they kind of have that guilt in the back of their head. Well, if we can delete that and empower them, now we're improving lives. And that's really, that's where I really enjoy a lot is helping people really hit their maximum potential.
All right. So if you followed the Ryder Cup recently, what kind of advice could you have given to the U.S. team?
Well, the Ryder Cup was very similar. It was very similar to what happened to Scott Adams a few weeks prior to that. And when you're in the lead, you got to press the lead, and that's what Tiger Woods used to do. When he was up 10 strokes, he was looking for 11 and 12, and they came into the final day up, and they didn't press it. I don't, the whole thing where it went wrong, but you saw that as they weren't pressing, as they weren't being, just trying to bury the Europeans, they let up.
Okay.
And when you got to understand, when your unconscious mind doesn't have a goal, isn't focusing on something going forward, it will typically revert to something in your past. And, then you start thinking about, if you're a golfer, is like, well, what if I blow it? What if I lose? And then you have a group psychology that rolled through, similar to we talked about the Phillies earlier, is that if one person starts to think it, then unconsciously everyone starts to think it. And you saw the whole American team just, from one to the other, just totally fall apart, unfortunately.
Now, in some other situations, for instance, this season with the NFL and the replacement referees, that's also something that I saw you had an opinion about in a newsletter that I received of yours.
Yeah, when the refs came, and here's some guys, again, getting nervous because now they're on national TV. It wasn't a college level, and then what if I make a mistake? And, of course, everybody wanted to just hang them for some of the calls because they thought that they were unfair. Now, what goes on in the player's mind, you're going to get some players that want to take advantage of it, which, they can, punish a player, but there's other people that are afraid they're going to get hurt. So someone like in Philadelphia, like Vic, what if a cheap shot comes in? And in the first couple of games, he was getting hit a lot. It wasn't really protected. And, that could end his career, could end his season, with something that would, take him out of the game. So all of a sudden, does Michael Vick play confident, or does he start to play, and hesitate in really stepping up and really being a great quarterback?
Do you think the media attention really gets to Michael Vick and Andy Reid? Some of these weeks where Reid is constantly getting bashed for some of his play calling, and Vic's getting bashed for his, running around the field too much and not getting rid of the ball. You think the media comes into play in their heads?
They have to hear it because they have to go out and answer the question. So it's going in their ears, and there's an answer coming out of their mouth. The question, are they trained to delete it, or do they allow it to totally affect themselves?
Again, for more information on Todd Stofka and his company, Philly Hypnosis, you can visit www.phillyhypnosis.com. I want to thank Todd for being on the show today. He's been a great guest, and that will do it for this episode of The Business of Sports. The Business of Sports has been brought to you by the Sports Marketing Division of American Advertising Services at 484-562-0060. That's American Advertising Services, 484-562-0060. Thank you. We'll see you next week.